We're really delighted to welcome you here to this Theology Week, which begins first with our Payton Lectures. We're so honored and grateful that you have come to join us to be part of this important week at Fuller Seminary. I'm Mark Laberton, president here, and I'm very grateful on behalf of our Board of Trustees and our faculty, and especially the School of Theology that sponsors these lectures, to really come together for this opportunity of learning, discussion, inquiry, conversation together, informally as well as formally. The Payton Lectures are lectures that began many years ago in the life of Fuller in 1948. They were founded in memory of the Payton family, and in particular, the lectureship is named for John and Eliza Payton, parents of Grace Fuller. And it's really an amazing set of lectures that have been given over the years, an opportunity for us as a seminary to host various international scholars, to invite them to come into our community and to bring to us a point of view that would be stimulating and challenging and energizing to our own reflection and to our own practice. This year's lectureship is no exception to that, and in fact, we're particularly delighted to be able to welcome our guest, who will be introduced in just a moment. I'd like to acknowledge as we begin this year's lectures that in this week as a seminary, we've suffered the sad loss of Glenn Stassen, a professor whose life has made an imprint on our seminary in a very significant way, and someone whose life was really deeply committed to the work of peace and justice. It's quite significant to me that this year's lectures on world religions and globalization feel as though they're urgent and compelling as a topic, partly, in fact, because we live in a world in which peace and justice, not least around religious issues, is so profoundly needed. So I'd like to just acknowledge Glenn's passing, to acknowledge that the questions of his life and the concerns that he had are in a certain way a lovely frame to hold as we think about the significance of the issues that we're going to be considering in this year's Payton Lectures. Let me invite Dean Lowen to come forward and lead us now. As he does so, I'd like to offer a prayer. Oh God, how grateful we are for your presence here, that we have the opportunity to be together in this chance to think, to respond, to consider, to reflect, to live in ways that engage you, engage the reality of the world that we're a part of, engage the significant challenges that are before us in the context in which all of us are citizens and participants. Bless these Payton Lectures, bless our lecture, bless all that is going to unfold in the course of this week. And we do so as we offer this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
My name is Howard Lowen, and I'm Dean of the School of Theology. And I'd also like to extend on behalf of the School of Theology our welcome to all of you to the 2014 Payton Lectures, which, as President Laberton has indicated, are designed to provide opportunity for this community to engage in the best theological scholarship around the nation and the world. And it is my distinct privilege today to welcome and introduce another guest of honor who joins this distinguished class of Payton Lectures, Dr. Miroslav Volf, founder and director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture and the Henry B. Wright Professor of Theology at Yale University Divinity School. Dr. Volf, we are indeed honored to have you on our campus. The campus of Fuller warmly welcomes you back to this institution, coming from what we consider a sister or brotherly institution on the other side of this continent, and especially so because of your previous sojourn through Fuller, both as a student in the late 70s and graduating, and I might add summa cum laude in those years, and as a most notable professor during about an 8-year period in the 90s. We are delighted at your return to our campus and honored to have you be the distinguished Payton Lecturer for this year. As many of you know, Dr. Volf was educated in his native Croatia, then in the United States and in Germany, earning his doctoral and postdoctoral degrees with highest honors, I might add, at the University of Tübingen, Germany, where he studied under the famed theologian Jürgen Moltmann. His teaching career has included positions at the Evangelical Theological Seminary in his native Croatia, Fuller Theological Seminary, and Yale Divinity School, where he has been for the past 16 years. And through the years, he has received numerous awards, fellowships, research travel grants that have facilitated his scholarship, his significant scholarship and service. I have noted in reading on his bio and his works that in his educational and vocational career, there has been a consistent pattern wherever Dr. Volf has studied, taught, or served. And he has done so with distinction. And he is widely known as a public intellectual with a reputation of being a theologian of the bridge, bringing the reality and shape of God's Trinitarian life and love to bear on the multiple divisions in today's world. Dr. Volf is widely and deeply published in the fields of expertise, as evidenced by the many books and countless journal articles he has written, some of which, as you will have noted, are in the back in the foyer. For many, he is best known for his 1996 work, Exclusion and Embrace, a Theological Exploration of Identity, Otherness, and Reconciliation. It won the prestigious Grawemeyer Award for Religion in 2002, and Christianity Today included it among its 100 most influential books in the 20th century. It was a book that grew out of his lecture in Berlin in 1993, in which his task was to reflect theologically about the Yugoslav wars marked by ethnic cleansing that was raging in his home country at that time. Indeed, Volf is passionate about advocating theological ideas with legs, as he likes to say, in that he has brought his theology of embrace to bear on how people of different traditions and faiths relate to each other. He is in great demand as a distinguished speaker, lecturer, and preacher at seminaries, at universities, religious and other public settings, doing bridge theology at the crossroads of these many local and global publics. Dr. Volf comes to us with a rich scholarly background, as you can see, as well as breadth of cultural, ecclesial, and global experiences, which eminently qualifies him to speak on the chosen theme of this year's Payton Lecture, World Faiths and Globalization, a Christian Response. The first lecture today is World Faiths, what are they and why do they matter? The second lecture tomorrow is World Faiths, Politics, Economics, and Competing Visions of Human Flourishing. And I might add that each lecture will be followed by a respondent. This morning's respondent is Dr. Mark Laberton, president of Fuller, and tomorrow's respondents will be 3 of our own distinguished faculty members. There will be a short 3-minute break between the lecture and the response. Actually, we're going to make it 10 minutes, and to give you a chance for those of you that need to go to leave, and for the rest of you to stay for the response and for the discussion that will follow. So now please join me in welcoming our distinguished lecturer, Dr. Miroslav Volf.
It's wonderful to be back home. I see here in third row my American family. John waving here, Marianne, Robert Mai, Mary Mai. Doug is somewhere. I'm going to see him on Tuesday when we have big reunion. The big event in my life coming here is really what happens on Friday morning when we celebrate at the Mai's home in Altadena. It's great also to come back to the institution where I studied. Actually, my first courses in systematic theology as a master's degree students were in this building, listening to Paul King Jewett delivered lectures. My own lectures in systematic theology were at one point in Travis Auditorium. And I used to go to McCormick and Schmick's for happy hour with the students. And I was known as a beer-drinking theologian by waitresses out there. And then at 7 o'clock to 9, I would then lecture in systematic theology. It was a really great time. So I'm delighted. Great beer, no. You know, I told my students that we'll have our office hours at McCormick and Schmick's, and we'll drink beer until we fall off our chairs. And some of them took it, no. So, world religions. World religions in the context of globalization is what I want to talk to you about these 2 lectures. And before I start, let me kind of position myself, give you a vantage point from which I am speaking to that issue. And primarily, I'm interested in the larger project of which these lectures are part, to parse out what is the relationship between world religions, and in particular also Christian faith as being one of them, toward globalization processes, and then in the context of globalization, which is to say, in the context of an interconnected and highly interdependent world where multiple nations live, so to speak, under a common roof, what does it mean for world faiths also to live in peace with one another? That's a roughly large project that I have. It's not a project anybody should undertake who had any wits to themselves, right? You're bound to step on so many different toes. You're bound to transgress against academic and other sorts of conventions, but I think we live in a moment in which something like that has to be done. We need perspective on the whole. And I think we live in a world of specialized knowledges, and what we lack often is ability to think about our lives as a whole, about the world as a whole, and that's my modest attempt to do so, an offering to, as a first opening, so to speak, on my part, in a larger conversation. But let me sketch for you kind of perspective which I bring, and I can do only a limited thing with this. There are kind of two basic options we can have as we speak about world faiths. One would be for me to try to shed the peculiarities and particularities of my own faith, of my own culture, and then kind of survey the world of faiths kind of impartially, as if I were some kind of mechanical drone, right? With no biases and interests of my own, just to take note of what is happening. But the view from nowhere, as it is famously called, is impossible. Somebody always flies drones for a particular purpose. And each of us puts in less poetically, drones aren't so poetical, okay, less metaphorically. Each of us is a creature of time and place, and we think, speak, write from our own particular vantage points. And yet, and this is the difficulty, and yet thinking about faiths in the context of globalization, we inescapably make claims about things that concern all people, their beliefs and practices, and our common life on this planet. So our human predicament is this: we are particular, but we inevitably make universal claims. So how do we deal with this problem of particularity with universal scope, so to speak? That's one option, is to take somehow, imagine that you can take the view from nowhere, but you can't, of course. The alternative is to offer simply a position from the perspective of a single faith. In my case, that would be kind of robust Christian commitments that I share, all the way from Trinitarian nature of God, all the creeds, I embrace them all. And a few things more. Maybe some things less too, but I'll leave it for that. So you might think that then the only option that you have would be to write from a very robustly particularized position, in my case, as I said, from the position of the Christian faith. And I think such a position is in fact indispensable. I have done so myself. Most of my work has been a kind of trying to explicate Christian commitments and apply them to a variety of situations that we face today, including the processes of globalization. I've done so, say, in the public faith, a book about public role of faith, written by a Christian, for Christians, and using predominantly Christian resources. And to non-Christians, then, the book says, well, this is how we see things, invites them mainly to consider whether it's true or not, invites them also to consider what they might say in response. But even that approach, I decided, for the project that I'm engaged in now, doesn't quite get you where you need to be. it doesn't seem to be enough simply to articulate our position from the Christian vantage point, taking Christian resources simply into account, because that would be as if we, as multiple human families living under the same roof of globalization, but one family were to articulate their own vision how our common life should be organized and said, this is what we think, this is it, right? This is what I have to offer to this thing, without taking into account the perspectives that other families share. And what I think indeed has to be done, we have to articulate our own perspective, but taking into account always the commonalities that we have with other perspectives. So some improved version then of simply Christian articulation of our position with regard to faiths in the globalized world, we need to recognize that we are always related to others, and that I have to construe my own account of our life together, taking into account perspectives of others on that account. Concretely, this means that each religion construes itself and others as having some significant common features that serve as a basis of their relation to each other and to globalization. They bring these visions of themselves and others in relation to themselves to a large common room table for discussion. And I'm going to take off my jacket because these lights are bearing upon me relentlessly. I'm going to roll up my sleeves because the work begins right now. So basically what I will do here is I will, from my own Christian perspective, give a particular read of world faiths and commonalities which they have with Christian faith. And this is an invitation also, of course, for others to do something of the sort. Now, I know that this is a controversial move that I'm making. We can maybe, during the time of our discussion, engage this and see whether it's necessary or not and what advantages and disadvantages are. But that at least is what I do. So what I will do shortly is I will sketch 6 rather formal common features of world religions that are exemplified to various degrees and in distinct ways in each of them, and suggest that they provide a framework for negotiating both relations among religions, including their visions of life worth living, and for their joint engagements with globalization. Now, these 6 features that I will shortly identify, I identify them as features of world religions, in contrast to, say, something like local religions. They are not some kind of a common basic core of these religions. I don't think they are. I don't think there is a common core of religions. There are also not key elements of some proposed future religion of the whole globe. I don't think such religion is going to be forged at all. I don't think it will ever emerge. We will be inescapably continue to be particular. But each world religion is distinct in the ways in which it understands these common features, and as such makes claim to truth and offers alternative accounts of life worth living. These features, though, help us make it possible to set up political framework for common life, to act in common, and when they cannot act in common, to negotiate our differences in peace. So identifying these features, I think, help us to negotiate our differences as we live in a common world. Now, let me say a few introductory comments, or first part of my lecture. Why is it that we have to deal with world religions today in such a way? And I think there are 2 basic reasons. One is incredible growth of world religions, and 2 is their political, public assertiveness. Now, both of these features of world faiths, or the situation of religion in the world today, has not been predicted by sociologists and other folks interested in cultural trends. They were, on the whole, thinking that religions and influence of religion will subside. That hasn't happened. We don't need to go into the whole reason why it hasn't happened, but we have to deal with the issue, and it's important for us to deal with the issue because religions continue to grow. Now, measuring global religious adherence is not an exact science, to say the least. Figures in various surveys don't always match, but what is clear, I think, is that the number of people describing themselves as religious, particularly as adherents of world faiths, is growing in both absolute and relative terms. Both absolute and relative terms. Take first the absolute numbers, tracked from 1970 to 2005. All major world religions increased in adherence, most boasting of spectacular gains. Buddhists, 233 million to 379 million. Christians, from 1.2 billion to 2.1 billion. Hindus, 463 million to 870 million. Muslims, 554 million to 1.3 billion. That's in the period of 35 years. The world religions have continued growing since 2005, especially Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, and Islam. By the year 2030, the Muslim population of the planet is expected to reach 2.2 billion. Now, during that same period, the number of adherents of those same faiths grew in relative terms as well, not just absolute terms, but relative as well, from 67.8% to 72.4% of world population. By some estimates, almost 80% of living human beings believe in God. That leaves, of course, many who think of themselves as convinced atheists, somewhat vaguely and perhaps not entirely consistently, sometimes describe themselves as non-religious. Now that will improve my comfort, I'm sure. It may make it more difficult for me to read, but we'll negotiate that too. So the basic thing that I want to suggest with these numbers is that religions are growing in both absolute and in relative terms. And most of this growth is due to increase in world population, right? But in any case, the world is not becoming less religious place. The world is becoming increasingly more religious place. And the growth of religions also is not, so to speak, in spite of globalization processes, and I don't need to say that here at Fuller, but it's partly carried on the wings of globalization processes. Through technological revolution, but also through things like transnational migration. Now, the reason I mentioned, of course, this growth of religions is not to indicate some kind of gloating terms, we're better than the secularists, we're growing and they're decreasing in numbers. Growth of religion as such does not necessarily represent any victory or any loss. Religions are ambiguous phenomena, but what it does illustrate is abiding relevance of religion and need for us to attend to that phenomenon. Now, the second feature that I want to emphasize is political assertiveness of faith. Faith are not only a force in people's private lives, they are also assertive in public sphere. And we have seen a significant shift in, or increase in political assertiveness of faiths precisely in that very period that I have been sketching recently, from 1970 to 2005. For most world faiths, purely private faith is somehow truncated faith. It's faith not living out fully what it construes itself to be. Today, that's even true, say, of Buddhism. One of the most significant strands of Buddhism is the so-called engaged Buddhism, Our religion of spiritual enlightenment sees itself as culturally and politically engaged. That's also a sign of time. And I think that's connected with one very important process that happened in that very period again. And that is increased popularity of the ideal of democracy. Almost universally popular ideal. And you have to ask yourself, what happens when religious people embrace democracy as their ideal? Well, they will obviously bring their religious conviction into public realm. And that explains then why, together with resurgence of faiths combined with popularity of democratic ideal, you have faiths that are increasingly politically assertive. It's connected also with demise of some of the popular political ideologies, but I think it's primarily carried on the wings of the popularity of the democratic ideal. That's true, by the way, also of Muslims, not just of adherents of other faiths. Majority of world Muslims, they embrace democracy as an ideal. What's disputed, not just between Muslims and maybe Westerners here, Western kind of democratic traditions, but as well other religious folks as well, is to what extent can religious people embrace pluralistic democracy as their ideal? The democracy will embrace, it's not a big issue, certainly not an issue for monotheist faiths, but pluralistic character of it, and that's a challenge, as we know, not just for Islam, it's a challenge for Christianity, and certainly has been challenged over the centuries. So in two very significant senses in which people predicted secularization, one is demise of religious belief and religious adherence, two is disappearance of religion into the private lives of people. Secularization isn't taking place. Desecularization, if you want, is happening in the world. And that's, I think, what puts the issue of world religions onto the agenda for all of us who are interested, who are embracing prophetic religions with universal message and who are therefore interested in the way in which our own world as a whole is being organized and how life in it is being lived. And that brings me then to the character of world faiths. And most of my lecture will be on that topic. So world religions, by this I mean Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Confucianism. They are distinct. I make a distinction between world religions. Sometimes they're called also secondary religions, and the so-called local religions, or other people call them primary religions. The world religions emerged through something that scholars call axial transformations or axial breakthroughs. Such breakthroughs are most clearly visible in charismatic originators of world religions, the Buddha, the Hebrew prophets, Jesus or Muhammad. But religions themselves change in a long and complex historical process and really never correspond to the ideals, of course, of their originators. And each world religion, of course, is an ancient religious tree with its own kind, with many branches. And still, I think they share some important common features, even though they argue among themselves, and maybe that's why they argue among them, even though they argue among themselves and sometimes fiercely, about how best to understand each of these features. So what are some of these features? 6 features of world religions. They will be very important for my second lecture. So presupposition of what I'm going to say in the second lecture, which is probably more challenging one, are being laid right now in what I'm going to say about the character of world religions. First, world religions operate with the so-called two worlds account of reality. Local religions are so-called cosmotheistic religions. Gods and spirits, they're kind of aspects of the world itself. They're not extra mundane realities and powers. World religions operate with what Friedrich Nietzsche critically called two worlds account of reality. Without being dualistic, they split reality into two distinct though related realms, transcendent or unseen and mundane or visible, and they give primacy to the transcendent over the mundane. Second, human beings are understood as individuals. In local religion, devotion is tightly linked to social life of a group. People relate to gods and spirit primarily as a group, as a community, as a given socio-linguistic unit. World religions address human beings as individuals. They pull them out of their socio-cultural nexus and they insert them into a transcultural, pan-human religious community. Human beings as individuals, human beings qua human beings also, as we will see. World religions also make universal claims. Local religions are, well, essentially local. The gods you worship are the gods of your people, marking your social boundaries and helping your group to flourish. Sometimes there are kind of rough equivalents of gods in these local religions, and they can be translated from one to the other. That's an interesting endeavor, and this translation served very important purposes. You can read work of Jan Assmann on this. Is a very important work. World religions make claims to what is true, just, and good for all human beings, irrespective of their local culture. They offer a diagnosis of human condition, human predicament, for instance, captivity to suffering, the problem of sin, lack of guidance, and they sketch a way out of it: enlightenment, God's unconditional love, submission to God. Fourth feature, they all have goods beyond ordinary human flourishing. Local religions are concerned with your ordinary human flourishing. People invoke or placate divinities and powers to do what? Well, in order to achieve prosperity, health, long life, and fertility. They invoke gods in order to be preserved from disease, dearth, sterility, and premature death. They're all about the goods of ordinary life. World religions are concerned with goods that transcend ordinary flourishing. Human beings can attain the good even if they fail to achieve health, wealth, longevity. They can attain the good life even through such failing, like dying young on the cross, or while leaving the field of human flourishing altogether, say in Buddhist case. Now that's, I think, a very important feature, and it's going to be a very important feature. I'll emphasize that shortly, because in the context of modernity, affirmation of ordinary life, of just these features, prosperity, health, longevity, fertility, they are what the whole endeavor is all about in many ways. And world religions kind of put a break to that, or at least seek to. Religion, and that's fifth feature, is a distinct cultural system. Local religions and culture are practically identical. Local religion is ineradicably inscribed in institutional, linguistic, and cultural conditions of a society. Now, world religions, on the other hand, are autonomous systems, distinct, not necessarily separate, but distinct from a given culture. A world religion can therefore transcend all political and ethnic borders, and it can transplant itself into other cultures. Final feature of world religions is transformation of mundane realities. Local religions are marked by mood of ascent, sort of attitude toward life that in a kind of neo-pagan way, Friedrich Nietzsche emphasized, right? The reality, it is what it is, right? You need to kind of adjust yourself to reality, and within that reality, be who you are, right? And that's why Nietzsche called into question the two worlds account of reality. In the single world that you live, you simply assent to whatever is the case, and only weak natures are unable to do something like that. In world religion, this assent, fundamental assent to life, gives way to a kind of quarrel with life. Things aren't the way they're supposed to be. Now, this is the consequence, I think, of splitting of reality into transcendent and mundane realms and giving precedence to transcendence. Asceticism, prophetism, advocated in various religions to various degrees in different world religions. They're two basic ways of aligning mundane realities with the transcendent order. Now, sometimes we think of asceticism and prophetism as being complete opposites. Actually, they're not in many ways, right? Asceticism aligns your own self with the transcendent order. Prophetism seeks to align the whole of reality with transcendent order. There are big quarrels, of course, between ascetic and transformative religions, but they're quarrels from, say, Nietzsche's perspective about the same thing, within the same realm of concern, namely, transcendent realities ought to shape mundane realities. And so asceticism and prophetism are two aspects, because ascetic practices serve to adjust human bodies and souls, and prophetic engagement serves to adjust the circumstances of the world to the transcendent order. Now, these are the 6 features of world religions, and they quarrel among themselves. We quarrel among ourselves about how to understand these features. And I can go now through the quarrels within religions, between religions, about how to understand different aspects of these features, but I don't think that should be terribly necessary at this point. Of course, I want to also emphasize that all world religions are more than just a particular kind of cosmology and anthropology, more than set of convictions situating people in the world and providing orientation for their lives. They have symbols, rituals, sacred times, places, objects, and so forth. Religion is, in other words, much richer than what I've described. I've described a particular stance it has toward the world and toward life. And of course, I have to say religions, world religions, including Christianity, are also less than what I've described. Sometimes religions serve simply to mark the boundaries. They are like flags. People are not interested in religious account of the way of life, Christians including, right? They're interested in waving a Christian flag which demarcates them from other groups of people, and in that case they are emptied of the 6 features that I have been describing here. Sometimes they're mere magical tools also to ward off some dangers and so forth, so they can be much less than these features, but on the whole, when you look at the world religions, you see that that's where they push. That's the specific distinction that they make, contribution to the religious life. And you can see in each of these features also of the Christian faith. And now, between religions, among religions, there's going to be a big quarrel, right? We're going to argue for the truth of one position over the other. And I personally think that these conversations about the truth of how we understand these features are very important and very significant conversations. Don't understand what I'm trying to say here as, okay, as long as we have these 6 features, everything's okay. Then I'm saying these 6 formal features are the parameters within which a really significant debate about what makes life worth living, what is true human life takes place. Nonetheless, it's significant that there are these commonalities that we need to attend to. Let me make one final comment, and that is to relate the world faiths to the concern for ordinary life. As I said earlier, first feature is that world faiths split reality into 2, transcendent and immanent, and they also suggest that transcendent has a primacy over the mundane, that it ought to shape the mundane, that there is this quarrel with life that all world religions presuppose. But it's important also to keep in mind that none of the world religions that none of them is unconcerned about flourishing in the ordinary life. And that's, I think, a very important feature to emphasize because, as some of you who have read Charles Taylor will know, he argues in his book, Sources of the Self, that the affirmation of ordinary life is the most significant feature of modernity. This kind of sense that ordinary life is really what profoundly matters, not some transcendent realm or us going into some heavenly realm and inhabiting this, but rather affirming and enhancing ordinary dimensions of life. That's what modernity in many ways is all about. If world faiths are simply denials of ordinary flourishing, we'll have a strong conflict between modernity and world religions. And so I need to sketch just a bit the relationship between these, between transcendent and mundane realities in world faiths and how they relate to ordinary human flourishing. Now, the world religions, I think, have this complex account of human flourishing, which is stretched between these two worlds. But none of the world religions sees itself as a mere means of escaping ordinary life. And again, that's true even of Buddhism, most otherworldly of all world religions. All world religions see themselves also as ways of living ordinary life, each in their own way, a way in tension, sometimes to the point of irreconcilable contradiction with claims of other faiths. They all teach that we live ordinary life well when we align our purposes with the transcendent realm. Now, I have a few more minutes, and in these few minutes I could illustrate the point that I've just made by looking at the teaching of Jesus, for instance, but you're all very familiar with this, that a person doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. But instead, given these few minutes that I have, I will take a story of Job to illustrate that very point. Job is also, for those who study axial breakthroughs, Job is one of the figures of axial breakthrough. And for a while, I was quite fascinated, still am, with the book of Job, and it's a very puzzling book, and I know that many of you have your own takes on that book. I have my own, and this is a quarrel that we can have also around book of Job. But I hope that you'll agree at least with these basic features that I will give of it. The narrator sets up the story by stating that Job was a man blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned from evil, and that God blessed the work of his hands so that he was the greatest of all people of the East. Now, that's the presupposition of the story. The drama of the story begins with a dispute between Satan and God. Satan, an incarnation of destructive suspicion, claims that Job, like an adherent of a local or primary religion, fears God because God has made him to be such a great man. That's Satan. Now, God, who is proud of Job and of the integrity of Job's devotion, he disagrees. Now, I think the whole problem of the book of Job is that God made an unconsidered remark to Satan. Right? I mean, just imagine. When God says to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" What does God think Satan is going to say? "Oh yeah, I agree, he's a really great, cool guy, you win." No, so the whole story starts with this initial question to Satan, unconsidered on God's part. Now, the rest of the story is about Job's reaction to the test to which God and Satan put him. And the only way to settle the dispute between God and Satan is to put Job to the test. Test whether Job fears God for nothing or for what God has given him. Test whether Job is an adherent of a primary religion or whether Job is adherent of the secondary type of religion. Stripped of all belonging, bereft of children, and afflicted with painful disease, Job neither curses God nor gives up on insisting on his integrity. Instead, he contends with God on account of the blatant injustice of his faith, an agonizing exercise rooted in his unwavering adherence to God of justice and to the goodness of ordinary life. In the end, Job proved both that he and God were right and Satan was wrong. Job served God for nothing, for no other reason, except that serving God just is the authentically human way of living. Now you would think there's a complete primacy of transcendent realm. And yet, remember that God was the one who blessed Job. And at the end, the story of the Job, no less than a teaching of Jesus, the attachment to God and the affirmation of ordinary life aren't opposed to one another. Though Job serves God for nothing, he doesn't end up with nothing. After Job had proven the purity of faith through the ordeal, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. The attachment to God and moral uprightness has primacy, but material well-being, even opulence, is a positive good. In a book called Justice, Rights and Wrongs, Nick Wolterstorff has noted that according to the Christian faith, human flourishing has two components: life being led well, in Jesus' teaching, love of God and neighbor, in Job's case, fear of God and being righteous, and that's life led well, and life going well. In Jesus' practice, healing the sick, feeding the hungry. In Job's case, health, abundant possessions, many children. I think the same, life being led well and life going well, the same is true of other world religions as well. They differ in what they consider to be life lived well: love of God or neighbor, submission of God, extinction of desire, or something like that. They differ in how they imagine life that is going well, and they differ in how two are precisely related. These differences are important as they express unique character of each faith and lead both to mutual contestation and to learning and collaboration. But notwithstanding these differences, both components of flourishing are present in all faiths. We are meant to live our life well, and life is meant to go well for us, and life goes well for us, and we live our life well when we give primacy to the transcendent realm. One of the big temptations of faiths, world faiths, including Christianity, maybe mostly Christianity given how numbers have turned out, is to betray that original vision. The great temptation of the Christian faith is the same as the temptation, I think, of the generation who has been led through the wilderness, and God has tried to teach them that a man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And it's this lesson that has not been learned repeatedly, and I think it's this lesson that we are often failing to learn, and that globalization processes are actually seducing us to unlearn ever anew. And that's going to be the content of my lecture tomorrow. Thank you very much.